The dominant narrative in our society is that health is created by access to high-quality health care. While medical care is important, recent studies demonstrate that it accounts for only about 10% of our overall health. What really creates health is income, educational level, housing status, transportation availability, and environmental quality. This means that the vast majority of the things that influence our health are outside of the official healthcare system, and that many of these determinants of health are influenced by state programs and policies. That's why this program has featured many of my fellow commissioners talking about the health impacts of education, economic development, pollution control, natural resources, housing, corrections, and many more. Today I've invited the Commissioner of Minnesota Management and Budget, or MMB, to be on the program. You may be wondering, how does the agency that oversees state government's capacity to manage and utilize financial, human, and analytical resources impact health? You'll find out on today's episode of A Public Health Journal, and I think you may be surprised. Please stay tuned.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal, a program that explores public health issues facing our society today and tomorrow. The host of the show is Dr. Ed Ellinger, Commissioner of Health for the state of Minnesota. A Public Health Journal is sponsored by the Minnesota Department of Health and the Hennepin County Human Services and Public Health Department, all working together towards the goal of healthy people living in healthy communities.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal. Today we're going to look at the role of Minnesota Management and Budget, or MMB, in helping Minnesota be the healthiest state possible. The mission of MMB is to increase state government's capacity to manage and utilize financial, human, and analytical resources in order to provide exceptional service and value for Minnesota citizens. By managing the state's budget and workforce and monitoring progress towards state goals, MMB plays a major role in setting overall state direction and coordinating the efforts of all state agencies. This has a huge impact on health. Joining me in this discussion is Jim Schowalter, Commissioner of MMB. Jim has served in several leadership positions at MMB over the last two administrations, including State Budget Director, Deputy Commissioner, and now Commissioner under Governor Dayton. Jim, welcome to our program.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And, as I mentioned, people look at MMB and it's sort of an administrative budget agency and say, how does that relate to health? And I think we'll get into that. But sort of tell me, what is the role of MMB? How do you describe it when you're on the elevator going up to things at the Capitol?
Well, we're here to help you get things done. The role that you talked about, helping people, money be most effectively utilized is what we're all about. And we have different strategies to make that happen, whether it's helping keep track of what's going on, help people find good strategies, and mostly just help people work together so that state agencies are all working together, going towards the same direction.
Now, the health department has been in existence since 1872. MMB has not always been a state agency. How did that evolve?
I'd like to think we were there just before you, but I don't think that's the case. MMB actually wasn't created until just a few years ago, where the Department of Finance and the Department of Employee Relations were put together. I think in recognition that we don't really want to silo people, and we don't want to really silo money, because they're all part of that same thing of how do you get to results. So public health and the Department of Health has maybe been a little ahead of us on that track.
Yeah. Okay. And so if you look at what you're doing, how do you determine whether or not you're doing a good job? When the governor says, Jim, have you been successful this year? How do you kind of answer that question?
Well, some of it is just looking at the process, whether the decisions that were made had the right information on the table. We don't always know what the right decision is, because by the time they get to the commissioners, to the time they get to the governor, these are hard questions. There's not a right answer. It's not a cookie cutter kind of recipe. But we feel better if we know that going up into those decisions and implementing them, we at least all knew what the risks were, and we had an idea of what the possible implications were going to be, so that we could do the best job we possibly could. There's always a chance for incredible success or despondent results. In between, it's the efforts of people to try to do the best job for the people of the state. And most of the time we can get that done.
Yeah. Well, I know that if I'm going to be successful, I need your help in order to do that. So you can take advantage of any of the success that we have. And budget is a huge issue, and over the last several years we've had ups and downs in our economy, and you brought a slide that sort of shows the budget reserves over the years, and I want to put this slide up and tell us what we're looking at here. And I don't think we need to go into detail, but what's the big picture that goes on in this kind of slide?
Well, this slide really gives you the ups and downs of our reserves for the state, and the reserves are like the shock absorber for our ability to take bumps from the economy and state revenues along the way and keep things going so that we don't have to drastically scale down programs or quickly change revenue streams. And what you see is up and down and up and down. And so our eye needs to be on that, managing that indicator. But it also has to be on that longer range of saying, don't follow the bouncing ball. Follow what's happening in the public, follow what the trajectory of the state so that we're going in a steady direction all the time and not chasing the most recent data point.
Mm-hmm. So you're responsible for putting together the budget for the state. And what goes through your mind when you're saying, all right, what are the priorities? How do you go about thinking about the priorities? And and certainly from my perspective, I think, all right, what are the health issues that are there? And you have to balance out a whole variety of things. Where does health come into your thinking? Not just the medical care piece, but really the prosperity of the state, the overall health of the state. How do you balance all of those things in trying to put together a budget with all of those agencies that are clamoring at needing our share for this?
Yeah, well, health and public health is part of the fabric of the state. When we talk about at the very, very simplest level, what are we all about? We're all after trying to make the well-being of Minnesotans as good as possible. And usually that breaks down into how our communities are doing as well as how our economy is doing and the interrelationship of that. Health and public health shows up both in the medical care and the direct care, but it also shows up in so many different elements. And so that is the decisions of what are the incremental things that are ready. What are the things that people can understand that seem to have the biggest impact, and how do we put those things together in that budget narrative so that it has the best communication power for the governor, but also how it has it's ready so that as a state government we can implement it and make it work.
Mm-hmm. So now many of the things that public health deals with, you're really looking at long-term sorts of outcomes. You build a road and it decreases air pollution. The air pollution goes down, but the health impacts of that air pollution are really, seen many years down the road with decrease in heart attacks, from the nitrous oxide that's no longer there. When you're budgeting, how do you build in, as you saw in that slide, there's lots of ups and downs over the course of a couple of years. How do you balance both the short-term needs and the long-term needs of the state in putting together your budgets?
Well, a lot of that, frankly, falls on the shoulders of the governor, and that taking that long view of what's good for the state and where we're going. And so you want to make sure that you got that kind of judgment in the leaders of the governor's staff, the commissioners, people throughout state and local governments taking that longer view, because there's that element of judgment and just knowledge of where you're trying to go to, not taking your eye off of that prize. I think the other part is that that ups and downs, the bouncing ball. If you've done this enough times, you realize it's bouncing. And so with that experience, you come a next set of questions of what am I really looking for? And it is, the reduction in nitrous oxide. All right, looking for a long-term public health so that, in the end, our communities are as strong as possible. That results in good education. That results in better economy and better job opportunities, a better environment for everyone to live happy lives.
Mm-hmm. Now I know we have to do a lot of measuring of things, and in the next segment I want to get into about how do you measure the things that are going on throughout the agencies and throughout state government. But first we need to take a little break. We'll be back right after this message.
Michael Adams?
Here.
Michael Adams?
Here.
Michael Adams.
Michael Adams.
Students who miss 18 days of school in any grade risk falling behind and not graduating. Absences add up. Keep track at boostattendance.org today.
Welcome back. We're talking with Jim Schowalter, the Commissioner of Minnesota Management and Budget, about how his agency impacts health in Minnesota. Jim, one of the things that MMB has really done over the last couple of years is really start to say, how do we measure what we're doing? What kind of impact is state government having on the state in terms of the health of its environment, the health of its economy, the health of its educational system, the health, And so to tell me a little bit about, sort of the results-based accountability efforts that your agency is leading over the last several years. What prompted that, and where are you in the process of putting that together?
A great question. Our agency has been always in charge of keeping the state's books and keeping track of people, but in the end, as I mentioned before, how do you put it all together and see what's happening in the state? And part of what we've always been looking for is that kind of high-level scorecard, that kind of dashboard. You see it in other public sectors. We, even in Minnesota, had a rich tradition of Minnesota milestones, saying these are the top-level indicators that we're about. And we wanted to get back to that. We wanted to be able to point our policies and our decisions to a handful of things that Minnesotans are interested in. The funny thing is, no matter where you went, whether it was in Washington State, whether it was in other states that took these efforts, you almost always found some of the same core activities being at the heart of what state governments do. And so we took some of that information. We had really great conversations with you, our colleagues across state agencies, leaders throughout the organizations to say, well, let's see if there's any consensus here. And there was much more consensus than we expected. And with that dashboard, we could start to say, here's the things we're interested in, like health. But health is like a runway in the night. You're trying to land a plane. It's like you can't quite see what health exactly is, but you can see some of the indicators around it. You can see some of those lights that are shining in the darkness, that it might be the number of people who are uninsured, or our insurance rate, the number of people with diabetes, things like that. And so we were able to start to find those indicators, and we collected them. And we can have some, I think, very productive conversations going forward.
So, a lot of the things that occur, the outcomes that you're looking for, a sound economy is really not just about the employment and economic development. Transportation has some role in that, and education has some role in that, and health has some role in that. How do you put together indicators where it's not just what the agencies are doing, but state government as a whole? How do you think through that? Because nobody owns some of those indicators, but we all own those indicators.
Yeah, we do. And part of it is the way we do use the indicators. We don't say that any one indicator is wholly owned by an agency, and in fact, we all participate in them. So that was part of the discussion, so that we had multiple agencies thinking about issues of the environment, multiple agencies thinking about public safety. Some that even wondered why we invited them there. And by the end of the discussion, they completely understood that they had a role in it as well. The other thing that, to your point, is that there's things that are kind of leading indicators as opposed to lagging indicators, or things that are going on right now. And so we wanted to be sensitive to that there's inputs that help us go forward and continue, whether it's the economic momentum or momentum on our health or our environment or public safety, that we wanted to capture some of those things so that we weren't always just looking at what's happening today, but what's helping us build for tomorrow.
And certainly one of the things that I recognize as a health commissioner, that we're a really healthy state on average, but we have some great disparities. I mean, not everybody is benefiting. Not everybody in our state is healthy, particularly low income and populations of color. Do you see the same thing in these indicators statewide? Are you able to tease out, where there are some big variations in the level of success, or is this more an average that you're looking at?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Disparities is one of those ways that we're looking at the data, that although at the very top level we tend to look at more statewide averages, that doesn't tell the whole story. And so what we have is the ability to drill in and start to look at different communities, how these indicators play out in different places for different ethnic groups. It's like, what are those disparities that we should be paying attention to, so that as leaders we can start to assess, well, are our policies contributing to that? Are we finding strategies to bend the curve so that we don't take that as a given, that some communities of color may have different results than others? Yeah, we have to look at those strategies and make sure that we're taking those into account.
Mm-hmm. And when you're putting these together, I know we've had a lot of conversations within state government, what about the citizens of the state? Do they have any input into what those measurements should be, how they're going to evaluate what their government is doing for them? And has that been built in at all, or any thoughts about building that into some of these conversations?
It is where I think we're going to go. At the outset, we're trying to say, what are some of those indicators that are there and they're present and available on our website? And I think over time, it'll be much more of a broad conversation of what are those indicators and where should we be going. The beautiful thing about Minnesota is there's many things that we can build on that the public has already contributed to, whether it's the Compass Initiative, whether there's the old Minnesota milestones. We have a rich tradition of having these kinds of conversations, and in many respects, we've sort of built ourselves on some of those conversations, taking advantage of some of that input.
Mm-hmm. Now, and with the information that you're gathering, is any issue about information sharing? Are you developing new sources of information to do the evaluation? Because what gets measured gets done oftentimes. Do you have the right information to really evaluate what's going on?
Most surely we do not, but we're working on that. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we really do have the right information. But we also, in these conversations, realize that there's got to be a data development agenda as well. So that through conversations and looking at it, we realize we're not quite measuring the right thing, or that the measure that we intellectually want to have isn't lined up with what the programmatic people are doing. So that leads to, I think, a very useful next step of making sure that we line those things up so that people are working on things that yield the kind of results and information that policymakers need.
All right, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that MMB does, and I want to get to some of those things in the next segment, but first we need to take another little break. We'll be back right after this message.
I grew up in the housing projects of Cleveland. I didn't even know that life could be any better than it was. Education for me has been a way to get away from the agony of what was normal life. I want to be able to impact the community, not just look back on where I came from, but to reach back to where I came from and pull some people up with me. My name is David, and I am your dividend.
Welcome back. We're talking with Jim Schowalter, Commissioner of Minnesota Management and Budget, about how his agency, MMB, impacts health in Minnesota. Jim, you've been in public service for a long time, and I know my fellow commissioners, they all come to this job for a particular purpose, and I don't think any of us had started our careers right out of college thinking, I'm going to be a commissioner of something or other, but more in terms of what I wanted to accomplish in my professional career. How does this fit into your sort of plan as an idealistic young person getting out of college saying, I want to make an impact on the world? How does being commissioner of MMB play into that?
Well, it plays in pretty directly. I didn't have a plan to come to MMB a long time ago, but what I did have was a really interest in organizations and how people work together to solve problems, how people communicate and think things through. And to my surprise, I found a home in budgeting, and that led to, I think, more conversations and more thinking about organizations, public service, and how we can address public problems successfully.
Mm-hmm. And so how are you seeing this play out? Are you satisfied with how things are going, that this is a good way through budgets, through data to make really an impact on the world?
Absolutely, though even the discussion of results and those conferences that we're having of discussions across agencies suggest that while budgets are a good way of doing it, it's kind of slow. the world is traveling so much faster than the 2-year budget cycle. And the 2-year budget cycle is also, subject to those highs and lows that we showed in the other chart that was tracking reserves. And so that's not always the right way of doing it. I think the world is moving fast. We need to move a little faster as well. And so the more that we can keep our eye on the results, keep our eyes on management and good management strategies of all of our state resources, the better off we will be able to serve Minnesotans. And I think the more proud, frankly, of the services that we deliver.
Now, there are a few other things that you've been engaged with. MNsure, the marketplace, the insurance marketplace. What role did MMB play in the development of MNsure?
MMB helped to take that project from a place where it was about a dozen people and was moving out of the Department of Commerce, and we sort of helped it through the legislative session, helped grow it up until the time that we handed over the keys to the board. It was a really exciting, constant chase trying to get it up to scale, help people understand what kind of choices we had for governance, and work through that IT process and the organization building process. While there was certainly some huge bumps in the road, it was one of the more amazing and dramatic experiences I've experienced in public service, simply because the challenge was so big, the timeline was so firm, and in the end, I think the imperative to get it right was so important to Minnesotans. One of those few places where this budget guy, we tried aggressively not to be in front of issues. It was one of those few times where people say, "Oh, I know what you're doing. You're helping make that happen." It's like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. People, recognize how important insurance is, but I don't think they know what goes behind that to try to get this massive undertaking up and running so that people can actually go on and choose insurance plans pretty quickly and pretty easily.
Yeah.
So what the other thing is that the state is a huge employer, one of the major employers in the state, and you're involved in a lot of the workforce development. How does that play, and what kind of role do you play in workforce development? How to have a healthy workforce to make sure that what people are doing actually enhances their health in the workplace. And I know you have some workplace healthy workplace kind of environment activities going on. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Part of the reason why MNsure came to MMB was because we do run an insurance program. We help manage large systems, and we're trying to help state employees think through those health choices. So as an agency, we have an insurance program that provides a group insurance plan for all state employees. We also offer employee assistance programs. We work through the HR offices to think through the engagement of people in their jobs, what kind of performance evaluations, all of those things that aren't directly necessarily thinking of the health, but it is about the positivity of the workforce, the usefulness of the workplace in addressing problems, and thinking through how people can really be engaged in their work fully in a healthy manner that gets the job done, both for the state and for the employee.
What do you see as some of the opportunities that the state has over the next 5 to 10 years that you see that we need to really be poised to take advantage of?
Well, I think the first one is just really paying attention on a day-to-day basis about that relationship between employees with management and employees, so that performance evaluations are really embedded in our culture, and so that feedback or continuous improvement is always there. That is the real bedrock of how you run an organization and make it better. And it's going to be especially critical because our workforce is turning over. We have an unusually advanced age in our workforce. So as the baby boomers are moving out, we're going to have great opportunities to bring in many new people with different skill sets, different experiences, different perspectives. And as a state, our challenge will be to make sure we take full advantage of those. increasing the diversity of our workforce, increasing the ability to really engage in an inclusive discussion so that we can continue to offer better services and take our organizations further.
Mm-hmm. And I know that one of the big issues, sort of a roadblock or barrier, is that a lot of people think that the role of government is too big. And you're dealing with government. What is the role of government as you see us moving forward in a state like Minnesota to be the healthiest state possible?
Well, I think for every individual it is that question of how can I help? And you can think about those highfalutin, state government is too big or too small or just right. But as an individual and as a state employee, I think the opportunity is that I have a chance to work on something that really matters. And I can do that and put all my talents towards that and impact the lives of my friends, neighbors, and people I don't know throughout the state. And that's just a great opportunity. And so it's not trying to always do it all. It's doing your part and doing it really well.
Good. Well, Jim, thank you very much. This has been very helpful. I think our audience will appreciate MMB's role in state government a lot more now after this program. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
And I'll be back with a closing comment right after this message.
Thank you for calling your GED Pep Talk Center. All right, now, are you ready for your GED Pep Talk?
Being nervous is okay. It just shows that you're serious about getting your diploma.
A lot of things are scary. Heck, I'm scared of clowns.
No quiero oír. No lo puedo hacer.
DMC, life in your pep talk style.
Just keeping it real, Debs, just keeping it real.
Whatever motivation you need, we've got a pep talk for you. Get your GED pep talk and find free classes at yourged.org.
One's health is determined by multiple factors. Certainly one's genetic makeup is important, along with access to high-quality medical care. But other factors are also important, things like one's environment, social and economic circumstances, and individual behaviors. As I look around this country and around the world, I've noticed that the places where people are the healthiest are the places where all of these health-determining factors are addressed in a comprehensive and collaborative fashion, not in an individual or isolated fashion. Communities where people are the healthiest have effectively integrated medical care services with public health and social services and have delivered these integrated services in an educational, physical, and social environment that supports health. Minnesota is one of the healthiest states in the country because we have also done a good job of integrating medical care, public health, social services, and other public services in a unique and effective way. These interactions didn't occur by accident. They were thoughtfully implemented by leaders who understood what the Institute of Medicine meant when it described public health as what we as a society do collectively to assure the conditions in which people can be healthy. Certainly there is more that can be done, but Minnesota is a good model of the notion that there is health in all policies, that health is really the responsibility of all agencies, not just the health department. Optimal health for our state will not occur if we only work within our organization, agency, or special area of interest. Minnesota can become one of the healthiest places in the world only if we all work collectively to assure the conditions in which all Minnesotans can be healthy. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you can join us again next time on A Public Health Journal.